Stress, fatigue and dehydration. G-forces, concentration. Long stints as brakes fade, pressure mounts and nerves afraid. Fog lights, sun glare, when visibility isn't there. Rain clouds, oil slick, tyre wear means losing grip. Traffic jams, closing speeds, dodging slower GTs, cockpit heat, muscle strain, daytime heat, evening rain. Engine temp, power loss, blown hose at Maison Blanche, animals in dusk light, tunnel vision late at night, double stints, no sleep, tired eyes, brake too deep, quick nap, sun's up, coffee drunk from paper cups, public roads, bumpy track, oversteer, lose the back, flat out down the Mulsanne straight, grit your teeth and concentrate, strategy, pit lane, cold tyres, hydroplane, timing screens, team calls, frustration yells and driver brawls, tight chicanes and caution curves, don't lose heart and keep your nerve, keep it straight, keep it fast, bring it home and don't crash.
Just make it to the finish line. Checkered flag, champagne time, your name in lights like legends past. This is the Sporting Almanac.
Evening, Jack.
Good evening, Ben. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. How are you doing, mate?
I'm not bad. Basically, Ben and I are sort of trying something different this week in that Ben's going to take the bulk of next week's episode, which is on the Lions Tour. And I'm going to take the bulk of this episode, which is on the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Which is also exciting.
I've been told I am on strict orders to inform you, but I think you've already got there, that it is pronounced Le Mans.
Le Mans. I keep going between Le Mans and Le Mans, but it is Le Mans.
But yes, the 24 Hours of Le Mans.
It is, to put simply, an endurance race. It's the most famous endurance race in the world. It's probably, I would say, the most famous motor race in the world. I would say it trumps the Monaco Grand Prix, as we previously mentioned, and the Indianapolis 500, which also, between them, make up the Triple Crown of Motorsport. And if you haven't heard our previous episodes on Monaco, which was episode 8, and our bonus episode on Indianapolis, which was our only bonus episode, so you can't miss it, I would recommend you go and listen to them. But you can listen to them after this. You don't have to go listen to them first. It's all good information, though.
Yeah, they're not in order, are they? But if you want to complete your knowledge on the history of these various events, then that's the way to do it.
Indeed. And I will mention here, right up top, Graham Hill is the only man to have won all three. He won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1972. And I'm mentioning this up top because it is a vast subject matter, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and in order to best sort of address it, I'll be going over sort of the details of the event, a little bit about bits and pieces here and there, but I will mainly be focusing on the years prior to 1969. And in a later episode in the future, I will no doubt go further forward in time, but primarily before 1969, and primarily even more than that between 1950 and 1969. But there will be more details beside that.
Yeah, but with good reason. It's
vast, honestly.
Well, and also, like, some pretty dark stuff happened in that era, which is worthy of discussion.
Yeah, in all of motor racing, but particularly at Le Mans, as we'll get into.
Do you want me to set the scene on the town?
Please do. I really do. Yes.
Yeah, just
Absolutely.
very quickly, just because I think it leads you in very nicely to the event itself. I mean, for those who are not familiar, Le Mans is in northwestern France on the River Sarthe. It's basically almost perfectly between Nantes in the southwest and Paris in the northwest, and it's south of Cannes. And basically, it's got a very rich history with motorsport. I won't go into the specifics of Le Mans because I think that's what you're going to want to do, the 24-hour race, but it was the host of the first French Grand Prix, which took place on a 64-mile or 103-kilometre circuit in 1906, a one-off anti-clockwise closed public road circuit. You're sort of, I would like.
You're saving me a job. This is great.
Yeah, and
I'm smashing it.
For what it's worth, there's also a motorcycle 24-hour race there as well, an endurance race. Town itself, weirdly, has quite a rich sporting heritage. It's also got a League 2 or a League 2 football side, and it's got a basketball side, just to tie things back to the NBA episode.
I did not know that.
Has a basketball side that plays in the French Basketball League and in the European Basketball Champions League, and it's pretty successful. It's a 5-time league winner and a 4-time cup winner, including this year. They're the holders of the French Basketball Cup. So there you go. Welcome to Le Mans. Over to you, Jack, to tell us about the race and the centerpiece of this episode.
That was fantastic, because I wasn't expecting to learn anything in this episode, and I have. Thank you. As in, I was expecting just to talk non-stop for God knows how long this will last. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Let's hear some stuff about the race.
Indeed, yeah. So I'm going to start with just some little bits to intro, because I think it's important to say this up top. Give credit, first of all, to some of my sources. Richard Williams for his book 24 Hours, 100 Years of Le Mans, which I could absolutely recommend. It's very long, very detailed, which is what I love in a history book, a sports history book. So we'll definitely recommend that. I've got the audio version, very well read. Credit to Autosport magazine, or their online editions, for several good articles on this race. I got a few bits and pieces from a few other places, but those were my two main sources. And I'm going to start today off with a great big content warning. Today we'll be talking about a number of motorsports tragedies involving the deaths of drivers and spectators of all ages. We'll be discussing these in their historical context, but it's impossible not to discuss them in detail, and viewer discretion therefore is advised, as they say. So yeah, this weekend will be the 93rd running of what I would say is the greatest motor race in the world, 24 Hours of Le Mans. It's part of the Triple Crown of Motorsport, as we mentioned. It is also part of the Triple Crown of Endurance Racing, alongside the 24 Hours of Daytona and the 12 Hours of Sebring, both of which are in Florida, weirdly. Le Mans is part of the World Endurance Racing Championship, usually raced in teams of multiple drivers. At Le Mans, traditionally, it's 3 drivers nowadays. It used to be 2 drivers in the past, and we will get into a couple of occasions where people have tried to do it on their own, which is ballsy, shall we say.
I read about one guy, I can't remember his name because I didn't dwell on it too long, who definitely tried to do it on his own, unsuccessfully, I think.
I think we will come to him, and I think he will be a key part of this story. So, I mean, I can skip some of this now, talking about the town itself, but I'll go through the history. So, in the beginning, it came about. Yeah. As I've said before, the history of Le Mans is the history of motor racing. In the 19th century, Le Mans in the Sarthe department of France was a thriving centre of industry in the 1800s. One of the core families at the heart of that were the Bollé family, who played a foundational role in the region's industrial and automotive rise. So they started off 1875 building one of the first steam-powered buses, which is fun.
That can't have been efficient. A coal-powered bus.
I highly doubt it. Must have been heavy as well.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's a step along the road, isn't it? So what changed their minds over steam power was in 1895, they took part in the Paris-Bordeaux-Paris race, which was one of the first motor races in the very early days of motor racing. Their vehicle they entered was a steam-powered car, but it was outpaced by petrol-powered competitors and finished last, which was a sign of where things were going, a sign of the direction that motorsport was taking. So unsurprisingly, the following year, they decided to switch to petrol, and they entered a petrol car in the Paris-Marseille-Paris race the following year, aligning with the industry move, and had a bit more success having done that.
I genuinely didn't realise that France had such a long-standing history and relationship with racing generally, but specifically motorsport. I mean, I knew of...
That's the thing, yeah.
I knew the Grand Prix, and obviously, is a French... It's a French word, and I obviously know about Le Mans, and I know about the Monaco Grand Prix, but there's a lot more that I didn't know.
Yeah, so the word Grand Prix I think it was first used in horse racing terms, but the sport that motorsport was most closely based on would be cycling, which obviously is something that France adore, and the 24-hour Le Mans is probably only challenged in prestige terms in world sport in France by the Tour de France, which is without doubt the biggest cycling event in the world, and one we will be talking about in just a few weeks' time.
Yep.
So, in Early motorsport, one of the first competitions was the Gordon Bennett Cup, which was an international race series begun in 1900, which allowed national teams to compete and raise the sports profile. The Automobile Club de France, though, grew frustrated with the limitations of this event and wanted to form their own nationalistic and prestigious event. So they did, which was the first Grand Prix. In 1906, they offered a 45,000 franc prize for the winner of this new race. They held a competition in the magazine Lotto, which itself actually founded the Tour de France in 1903, just to link those together, for cities to bid to host it. Out of 17 applicants, the finalists were Brie and Le Mans.
Who won?
Which, yeah, who won? We'll tell you next week, no. The ACF, the Automobile Club de France, had now become the Automobile Club de la Sarthe and kept changing their name, so I'm just going to refer to them for now as the ACF. They awarded the race to Le Mans. Local business community raised funds, convinced by a man named Georges Durand, secretary of the ACO, the Automobile Club de l'Ouest, who I'm going to refer to a lot in this, so please remember the ACO. They were convinced by the potential commercial benefits. Obviously, a lot of people will come to the event. You'll get to sell a lot of your stuff to them. Simple as that. As you mentioned, 1906 French Grand Prix held on a triangular 63-mile, 101-kilometre anti-clockwise circuit east of Le Mans. It ran 6 laps per day for 2 days, covering 769 miles total, with cars released every 90 seconds. Renault, using Michelin tyres, won at an average speed of 62 miles an hour, which wasn't shoddy, actually, for the time.
No, that's fast.
Within 10, 15 years at this point, they'd gone from barely hitting 30 miles an hour to being well over 60 as an average speed. So, yeah, big improvements. Obviously, the speeds will get much faster very quickly.
Yeah, exponential growth in speed.
So I don't know if we mentioned this in Indianapolis, but a similar problem occurs here in that one of the main problems early on is because it's such a big circuit, they can't really charge fans to come see it. Smaller circuit means you can build grandstands, you can limit the viewing points of it, and you can charge fans to get in. This is one of the main reasons that circuit or oval racing took off in the United States, because they're all about the dollar, and you have a captive audience. Essentially, they have to pay to get in. You can give them good seats and charge them for drinks and whatever else once they're inside.
That is genuinely fascinating, mate, because it hadn't even occurred to me that like Spa, the Nürburgring, Le Mans, these are massive, like traditionally massive circuits. Where you could watch them anywhere. They're like miles and miles and miles long. Yeah, so that's really interesting. Great observation. Learning something.
Good things. And the circuit was redesigned to be much shorter, both for safety and, of course, to better control spectators. This allowed organisers to charge admission, a crucial financial consideration. The new course ran clockwise, measuring 10.7 miles, or 17.2 kilometres, incorporating the now famous Mulsanne Straight and Tetra Rouge.
Mm-hmm. The Mulsanne Straight will come up again.
It will be mentioned several times, yes. So the Mulsanne, I've mentioned now actually, the Mulsanne Straight used to be the longest straight in all of racing. It has now got a series of chicanes in to slow it down because it was just so damn dangerous.
Yeah.
The speeds they used to get up to, the margin for error was minimal.
If you made any kind of mistake or if you crashed into somebody, game over.
It essentially, the cars got too quick for the length of the straight, and the aerodynamics involved in the cars, and the air gets underneath them and they start flipping over, as has happened many times and still happens to this day in endurance racing or in Le Mans style racing. So
CC Mark Webber, I think.
Well, that was a Formula One race, and he caught air there.
I think he might have had a similar crash at Le Mans.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Whilst you're talking, I will verify my own fact.
Well, my research has basically just gone up to 1969, so you're ahead of me there. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
So racing returned there in August 1920. Smaller events as motorsport began to re-establish itself in a changed world. The 1921 French Grand Prix was held there, won by a man called Jimmy Murphy, who actually later in the same car went on to win the 1922 Indianapolis 500. Unfortunately, Murphy died in 1924 when he crashed and a wooden barrier pierced his chest during a dirt track race. So there we go. That's the first use of our content warning there. Yeah. It's a very, very dangerous game.
Yes, Mark Webber, by the way, can I just quickly say, did have a backflip at Le Mans.
There you go.
1999.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, I think it was in the warm-up. Anyway, we're digressing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, how did the 24 hours come about? Georges Durand, editor of La Vie Automobile, worked with a man named Charles Theroux and the tyre manufacturer Émile Coquille of the company Rudge Whitworth to create a true test of automotive endurance. Theroux suggested an 8-hour race, but Durand, he wasn't having any of that. He wanted to go the full hog, 24 hours, believing it was a time frame both that would challenge the drivers and that the public would easily understand and admire, which I think is genuinely very insightful.
Yeah. Astute.
Even to this day, 24 hours, even between a team of 3, it used to be teams of 2, and as I mentioned, some people have done it single-handedly. It's a long old slog. Test the car, test the people.
I actually cannot believe anyone was allowed to do it on their own. Like, that's just fundamentally
I will
dangerous.
come to that. Yes, it was. I mean, this was the 1920s. This was the heroic age of exploration. You're talking transatlantic flights, Everest attempts, Sahara crossings, ocean races. So the idea of a non-stop race was part of that sort of wave of, challenging what the humans could do in a new era, in a new age with technology, improving. But it was also inspired by a 24-hour motorcycle race, which is called the Bol d'Or, which had been held near Paris. So this all led to the first 24-hour Le Mans in 1923. Only road legal cars were allowed to enter. You had to have produced 30 production examples of the car, which is called homologation. And cars were required to have 4 seats. Unless they were under 1100cc, then only 2 seats were required. The cars were painted in national racing colours. So for France, that was blue. Italy, it was red. Germany, it was white. Britain, it was British racing green.
Yes.
Belgium, it was yellow. And USA was white and blue. The cars were numbered by engine size, which persisted for a long time. Each team had 2 drivers, one in the car at a time. 60 kilogram ballast was added per empty seat, and the average speeds required to stay in the race the following year, because the idea was you'd qualify by meeting a certain speed to be able to compete the following year. It was ranged between 42 miles an hour and 24 mile per hour averages. So not quite the speed seen later, but it was an endurance race.
Mm-hmm.
Drivers could only repair the cars themselves, whether that be in the track or in the pits. No outright winner was crowned until a lot later. It was originally a triennial cup, so it was basically who had the best results over a 3-year period. That later became the biennial cup, but for the prestige and the way the public associated, victory of winning the actual race took hold. And in the late 20s, they started awarding the Coupe à la Distance, which was the winner of the overall distance. Although, retrospectively, certain drivers are considered to have won the early ones, obviously. Early races, there was mostly French drivers and French cars who entered originally, but there were a couple of Belgian cars and a lone Bentley in the original race. W.O. Bentley, the founder of Bentley, was initially sceptical, but he came by train to spectate in that original race. The race began at 4 p.m. on the 26th of May 1923, ended 24 hours later at 5 p.m. on the 27th, because they chose a day where the clocks were going forward, just to be confusing.
Yeah.
There was very bad weather early on, rain, hail and wind, and the cars generally didn't have windscreen wipers, which was a invention only really common in America at the time. A few drivers wore helmets and goggles. Pits were minimal, although there was a few tents set up, and one company, the Hartford Shock Absorber Company, offered 150 gallons of onion soup, 50 rotisserie chickens, and 450 bottles of champagne to anyone who came to visit. So
worth it for the chicken.
Exactly. Spectators enjoyed an open-air cinema, fireworks, a jazz band, and a bar. And 30 out of 33 cars finished, which was a 91% finish rate, not topped for years at that point. Reliability is obviously a big factor in this race. So yeah, Bentley became one of the dominant teams from 1924 onwards. 1925 was the first driver death in the event itself. The death of Marius Mestivier at 8 p.m. during the race. He swerved suddenly and crashed heavily into a ditch. Many believe he was struck in the face by a bird, which was not the last time that would happen.
What, the driver was hit in the head by a bird?
Yes. In the early days, I think they were almost all open.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at
top cars,
we'll get into the some of the more graphic of it. Well, one particular event, but like if you look on the videos, like it's absolutely mad. They're not just like open air. Like half their body is like outside the parameters of the car.
Yeah, some very small cars as well as time goes on. Very small, very light sports cars. out of the car and a lot of the time not wearing any harnesses as well.
It's basically a
Which
goggle.
we'll come to.
Got a pair of goggles, no helmet.
Maybe a leather cap.
Yeah, a leather cap. It's a pair of goggles and, like you say, no seatbelt on.
Helmets did become mandatory in 1924, although that included leather helmets, so read into that what you will.
I'm sure that's really effective against a bird at 60 miles an hour.
Yeah. 1927, there was the first big pile-up, which occurred at Maison Blanche. The crash highlighted the need for better lighting, better light on the cars, better communication, and a flag and marshalling system, which would slowly start to come in years to come. This is sort of setting a scene of how slow these sort of safety developments come, which will become, I'm sure you can imagine, a theme of this episode. Mm-hmm. So yeah, by the end of the 20s, the race was fully established as one of the most prestigious motorsport races in the world. The 1931 race was notable for another grim milestone, which again, sadly, wasn't the last of its type. The first spectator to be killed. Jules Bourgoin was struck and killed by a car after stepping into a restricted area. 4 more spectators were injured in the incident. There was a similar incident at a later point involving 4 teenagers, also in a restricted area, who were hit and killed by a car. They were in a place they shouldn't have been in, but it set a trend that, unfortunately, continued in decades to come.
Now that you've mentioned spectators, mate, it's probably worth mentioning just to, again, put a little bit of context around this. Le Mans, I think, holds the record for the largest attendance at a motor race and possibly a sporting event, well over 300,000 people.
400,000, I believe.
Yeah, and I think the 2024 edition, so last year, there were 329,000 spectators, bearing in mind they know that for sure because it's ticketed, and that perhaps would have been more difficult to measure, as we discussed in our FA Cup episode, for example, with Wembley and earlier editions of the particular tournament. So yeah, a lot of people in close proximity to a high-speed circuit, which is
very high speed,
renowned for quite significant accidents. So I'll let people's imaginations do the math on that.
Yeah. So I think now's a good time. We'll get into some records on the circuit. So go through some of these quickly. Most wins by a constructor. Porsche with 19 since 1970.
I saw
most
that.
recently in 2017.
I know they have I knew they had a modern day relationship with this race, but I really didn't realise that they were the most successful. I saw that and was surprised. Because there
was races in the 1970s where the vast majority of cars in the field were Porsches. Because bear in mind, it's not necessarily just the Porsche Works team. It's also individuals or tuning teams or whatever it might be buying their cars and putting them in the race. But there were some races where the vast majority of the field, especially in the time where Porsche 911 had just come out, and that was a very, very popular car and affordable car for people to buy and race at the time. So, early 1970s, there were some races where about 3/4 of the field were Porsches. So not really a surprise that they've got that many wins, really.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. After them, Audi with 13, Ferrari with 11, and 2 best British manufacturers, Jaguar and Bentley, with 7 and 6 respectively. Bentley won 5 out of the first 8 events, the Bentley boys, as I mentioned, and then went 73 years without winning one before winning in 2003, which is quite interesting, winning their 6th. Toyota won 5 in a row between 2018 and 2022. Had recent success there. McLaren have 1 victory in 1995, which is relevant because they are the only manufacturer to have won the Triple Crown of motorsport, sealing it in 1995, having won the Indy 500 twice, and Monaco many times, mainly thanks to Ayrton Senna. Germany as a country holds the most wins with 34, unsurprisingly, with Porsche and Audi the top 2 teams, no surprise there. The most successful car is the Audi R8, winning 5 of 6 races from 2000 to 2005. 5 cars, as in actually the same vehicle, have won the event more than once. I haven't got the list of what they are. I know 1968 and 1969 was one.
That's pretty cool.
Porsche holds the record for the most class wins. Unsurprisingly, also holds the this is what I was saying, most record for the most single entries in one race. 33 out of 49 cars in 1971. Although these were obviously, as I said, mostly privateers driving the 911. Most wins by a driver, Tom Christensen with 9, overtaking the previous record of 6, which was Jackie Ickx.
Yeah, Jackie Ickx, who also came second in the F1 World Championship twice.
Yeah, 69-70, I think. or 68 and 69.
Something like that, yeah.
69 and 70, I think. But yeah, very good driver. Unfortunate to miss out on an F1 World Championship. Obviously, a legend at Le Mans, and more on him later. The UK's had the most winning drivers with 34 ahead of France with 28. The most starters, this is impressive, held by Henri Pescarolo with 33 between 1966 and 1999, including, I think, 32 of them in a row.
Whoa.
I think he just missed 1967. It's impressive. The youngest winner, Alex Wurth, in 1996 at the age of 22. The oldest winner was Luigi Chinetti in 1949 at the age of 47. And the oldest driver is Dominic Bastien in 2021, and guess how old they were?
Well, no, I've got to go high.
Got to go high.
70.
75.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
The youngest driver in 2022, do you want to guess how old he was?
Super licenses presumably apply. 16?
He was 16, which is mad.
Yeah, that is mad.
The most time spent in the car, Eddie Hall in 1950 with 24 hours.
Stupid.
And I will come to that.
Must have been hallucinating by the end of that.
I know. Honestly, I don't know. There's a good quote on him, not about his hallucination, but I'll come to that. The highest top speed was 253 miles an hour in 1988, which was Roger Dorsey in a Peugeot.
Is that when they all said, "Look, it's time to calm the fuck down and put some chicanes
put the chicanes in"? Yeah, 253 miles an hour is scarily fast.
That is so quick. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, that just blew my mind. That's why I felt compelled to comment.
The highest average lap speed, 157 miles per hour by Kamui Kobayashi in quali in a Toyota in 2017.
Wow, that's
the highest attendance, 1969, 400,000. Do you care to guess what the lowest attendance is?
I presume 0 in COVID.
There you go, 2020, 0.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
worked out.
I did. It's fairly contemporaneous. We did live through it.
Yes. Some traditions. Scrutineering is held in Le Mans Town Centre. We'll get that right eventually. Where cars are publicly inspected in the Place de la République. Then a driver's parade is held called the Parade de Pilote. I'm terrible at French. Parade de Pilote. Through the streets of Le Mans on Friday evening before the race. A pre-race concert is held featuring French and international music acts. They sing the French national anthem before the race. There's a military or aerobatic fly past. Very American, all this. Traditionally starts at 4 p.m. on the Saturday and obviously ends at 4 p.m. on the Sunday, unless they happen to put it in a year where there's a clock change on that day, as they did for the first one. The race is started by waving the French tricolour flag, usually by a guest of honour. So they race through the night, with their lights on, and you can see the brake disc glowing as well, which is kind of cool. Iconic corners and straight in the race, like the Mulsanne Straight, Arnage, Indianapolis, Tetra Rouge. And it's considered, sort of conversely, both quite boring at times and also extremely dangerous, especially historically, which seems sort of counterintuitive, but they're the main complaints that it gets.
Yeah, I can imagine it is quite dull at times because... the
it's an endurance race. They have to pace themselves.
Yeah, and the concept of the race as well is go as far as you can in the time allotted. And so it's not really about overtaking people as such. And teams often lap one another, and pit stops and driver changes and stuff influence all that. So there's not a lot of on-track racing in the conventional sense, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Well, it's a war of attrition. Certainly, historically, it was very much a war of attrition. It was... You'd use your tactics, like you try and push the other team. If there was a team who had a quick but unreliable car, you'd push them into going too quick, so they'd retire and your slower car would then go on and win it. So you'd often split your team. You'd have 2 of them holding back and pacing themselves, and one of them just burning out in front, burning the engine out, not needing to finish, but needing someone like a Ferrari or a Ford or whoever it was at the time to chase them and to take out 1 or 2 of the leading drivers or teams, give yourself a chance. So yeah, some tactics in it. Winning cars are lifted onto the podium or parked in front of it for celebration, and the podium ceremony is held above the pit lane garages overlooking the start-finish line. Oh, that's about it for the old traditions.
I was just having a quick look at the list of drivers that have won it, There's a lot of sort of like, I can sound really like harsh here, but like a lot of bang average Formula One drivers that have won it. Antonio Giovinazzi.
I thought this too, but I think it shows how good you have to be to get into Formula One.
Yeah.
That the next level down, endurance racing, is probably what would be considered the second tier below Formula One in terms of European anyway, motor racing on the FIA. It shows how good you have to be to get into F1 that these drivers often drop out and then they're part of these winning teams. Obviously, it comes with a lot of prestige getting to Formula One, and it's not to knock them in any way, shape or form. But
let me throw
it's why I said...
Go on.
That's why I was surprised that Jacques Villeneuve had never won Le Mans. Like, how had he not found himself in a good car and completed his personal Triple Crown? Anyway, go on.
No, I was going to say, I'll just throw some names at you because there's quite a lot, like Brendan Hartley, Sebastian Buemi, you obviously already mentioned.
Yeah. Hartley's won a couple or two or three. I think 3, maybe.
Kobayashi, you mentioned already. Sebastian Buemi, Fernando Alonso's bang average, isn't he?
Yeah, famously.
Nico Hulkenberg. Yeah, like this is just Alexander Wirtz. Like this is just
very harsh on Nico Hulkenberg there, calling him bang average.
Well, he's never podiumed.
Great driver.
Never podiumed in F1, has he?
Only matter of time.
I know that he's. I know.
You wait till he's in the Audi.
Well, this is the thing. A lot of different cars. Yeah, I do understand that. But yeah, like still, I mean, it's just quite interesting. Helmut Marko has won it, which is very random.
Yeah, I knew that.
Johnny Herbert, Martin Brundle.
Good drivers. They're all good drivers. I mean, Johnny Herbert won 3 Grand Prix, I think. Martin Brundle didn't, but he went toe-to-toe with Senna in F3. He was a good driver, and then he had a big accident in 1984, which curtailed him a little bit.
Mm. And then, but like when you further back you get, the big names really. So yeah, like it's sort of, I guess it gets less. My point gets diluted the further back in time you go, because then it's like Jochen Rindt, Bruce McLaren, Jackie Hicks, like Graham Hill, as you've already mentioned.
Yeah.
There's others. Yeah, Mike Hawthorne, who we'll come to.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. It's just interesting. I just thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as I've mentioned this in the last couple of episodes, the Monaco and the Indianapolis ones, back in the day, back in the 50s and 60s particularly, drivers would race everything. They'd race in Formula One, they'd go and do Le Mans, they'd do the Indy 500, either as part of the Formula One World Championship or after it stopped being part of it. More so after, weirdly enough. They'd go and do all these events. Therefore, there was an opportunity to win the Triple Crown, opportunity to win it in the same season you might have raced in the Monaco Grand Prix. Nowadays, as I say, Fernando Alonso took a few years out of Formula One, did Le Mans, won it twice, tried to win the Indy. Had a good chance to, but didn't manage to win that. May still do it in the future, I don't know. But you basically have to, it's one or the other nowadays, with the exception of Fernando Alonso, who did Indianapolis 500 instead of the Monaco Grand Prix 1 year. But that was because McLaren were terrible at the time and they needed some good PR.
Yeah, like because the Indy, like you either need to do it after your career is finished. You'll never be able to do it simultaneously, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, couple of other traditions. One that comes from Le Mans, which was in 1967. I think we mentioned this before. Dan Gurney and AJ Foyt won in a Ford GT40, which was the second of 2 wins for the Ford Works team after they decided to take on Ferrari with great success.
Is this the Ford-Ferrari rivalry?
Yes, this is the second one of them, yeah. So it was the first time that a driver, Dan Gurney won. Dan Gurney and AJ Foyt won. Dan Gurney got handed his bowl of champagne at the end, and instead of just having a swig of it, as was traditional, he looked down, he saw Ford CEO Henry Ford II, team owner Carroll Shelby, and their wives, and decided what would be more fun right now than to soak them in champagne. So he shook up the bottle, sprayed the champagne over them, and started a tradition that exists to this day of spraying champagne after winning the race, which indeed is pretty much any motor race.
I did not know that had a genuine origin story.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Dan Gurney. There you go. So another thing that used to happen, which doesn't happen now, is do you know about this? Le Mans start. The starting procedure.
I know that it used to be a run to the car.
Yeah, it's mad. So traditionally, in modern motor racing, there's two ways to start a race. You either do a standing start, like in Formula 1, where you go into a grid, some lights go out and then you start, or you do a rolling start, like in IndyCar, or if they're restarting a Formula 1 race in dangerous conditions, where you get behind a pace car, do a lap, and then the pace car comes into the pits and you race from that point. So there are your two alternatives. Le Mans offered a unique third alternative where drivers started outside their cars in marked start boxes on the opposite side of the track to their cars. The cars were switched off and parked in a herringbone formation, which is basically at an angle, 45 degrees facing the direction they were about to drive in. And on the signal of the drop of the tricolour, the drivers would sprint across the track, jump into their cars, fire them up and set off. So these were incredibly dangerous for two reasons. Firstly, it created an immediate speed differential between fast starting cars from the back of the grid and slower cars starting from the front, as in slower to get started.
If someone drive into the back of people, basically.
Yeah, if someone who was first on the grid took more time to start their car, and someone from the back of the grid had already got up to speed, it's like pulling out on a motorway or highway, pulling into the fast lane of a motorway. When you've got no speed,
from
someone's going to crash into
stationary.
the back of you.
Yeah, from stationary.
Yes, from stationary. As good as the acceleration on these cars are,
with no indicators,
you could already be going over 100 miles an hour at that point. So very dangerous in a very narrow section of the track, which we'll come to. Secondly, when these starts were first introduced, cars were relatively slow moving, and most drivers preferred to go without safety harnesses anyway. As safety consciousness slowly improved and cars got much quicker, safety harnesses became necessary. At Le Mans, though, in order to gain an advantage or not lose an advantage of your sort of grid slot, drivers would simply not buckle up before starting, choosing instead to either do it on the first straight or, more likely, just do their entire first stint without harnesses on. As you can imagine, this led to a number of deaths in early laps and eventually the end of the Le Mans start, with a rolling start now used. More on that later. Just a tease what's coming up.
Dangling the cat. I mean, we've made so many references to the fact that we're going to talk about a horrendous accident.
I'm going to come to it very, very soon, yeah. So,
and it is horrendous.
Yeah, the cars it's the worst. There's nothing worse. There's literally, I'll come to it. There's been no worst accident in sport caused purely by the sport itself. Obviously, you've got stadium disasters. Obviously, you've got, things happening sort of outside the sport itself. But
it's a catastrophe.
We'll come to it soon. Of untold proportions. So the cars, as I mentioned, have evolved a lot over the years. So as I mentioned, they're separated into different classes. In the early days, they were separated by engine size primarily. As time went on, there was sort of different formulas for each class, different rules governing each class. In the 1950s, it was mainly sports cars. So you had a lot of small cars, open top. Some of them with quite big engines, some of them with 5-litre engines, or you get smaller cars with better aerodynamics, and you got some good battles as a result, Ferrari versus Jaguar being a good example. Later on, they introduced what were known as, initially as experimental cars, but later as prototype cars, where the rules were a bit less restrictive, giving essentially teams the ability to showcase what the cars of the future would look like now. And that sort of continues to this day, although the prototype class got renamed the hypercar class a couple of years ago. Nowadays, you've got three classes. You've got the hypercar class, you've got LMP2, which is Le Mans Prototype 2. So it used to be LMP1 and LMP2. Now it's the hypercars and LMP2. And then you have GT cars. GT cars are like production cars, so cars which are in normal production, then the prototypes don't have to be production cars. Le Mans originally started out, as I mentioned, you had to have had 30 production cars of that car to enter it. Those rules got relaxed a bit after the Second World War to try and encourage cars to come back.
Rule change seems to have worked, to be fair.
Yeah. Le Mans really led sort of the development of different technology which are now exist in road cars as well as in sports cars. Things like disc brakes, which Jaguar introduced in the 1950s, tubular space frames, Mercedes-Benz, which were lightweight, rigid chassis. Different materials were used. Originally it was steel, later it was aluminium or magnesium, which unfortunately we will come to. Yeah, improvements in fueling systems, in pit stops. The layout of the cars were front engine mainly originally, but now mid-engined or even rear-engined in some cases became
the introduction of
more popular.
No, this isn't the car, but the introduction of an actual pit lane, which we'll come to.
Yeah, that was a good improvement. And aero, obviously, as well. So wings and aerodynamic bodies, and bodies will cut through the air better. So you saw seeing that coming in, like some crazy looking cars in the 1950s particularly, which were just designed to cut through the air as quickly as possible, which also made them incredibly dangerous in many cases. But yeah, it's the 1950s and 60s particularly is a really interesting time, which is why I've focused on it so much now. But before I go into that, I'm going to doff my cap to one subgroup of drivers that we haven't really got to talk about that much at Monaco, because they don't really race in Formula One, unfortunately, or at Indianapolis, where they do race nowadays, but they didn't race until the 70s, as we discussed, and that is female drivers.
Mm-hmm.
So Le Mans, unlike those two, has a very long and actually quite proud history of female drivers. This is despite the one blot on that copybook being female drivers being banned from competing from 1957 to 1971, which was a knee-jerk reaction to the death of Annie Bousquet at the 1956 12 Hours of Rennes, and to avoid potential bad PR. Now, the bad PR in the late 1950s was quite essential for a point we will come to later. Up to 2024, there have been 65 female drivers who have competed, with 5 more due to take place in 2025, including 3 times British W Series champion Jamie Chadwick, who's racing with IDEC Sport in LMP2. Shared with Mathis Joubert and 3-time Le Mans winner André Lotterer. There's also Lilou Wadou, who in 2023 became the first female winner of a FIA World Endurance Championship race. She's racing in the GT3 class in a Ferrari 296 for the Richard Mille AF Corse team. And there's the Iron Dames, who have raced for the past few years, who are an all-female team. This year, Celia Martin, Rayo Frey and Michelle Gatting sharing a Porsche 911 in the GT3 class. So 5 women competing this year. To give you an indication of how common female participation was and how far it goes back, the record for a single year is 10 women competing in 1935, which is incredible.
That is good. Yeah, that's very good. I thought I was going to ask, the question I was going to ask was how's that 60 split across the eras? Because obviously if it's sort of like 40 in the last 10 years, it's not very indicative of... a
big old dip in the middle when they banned it, but big at the start, big at the end.
Nice. That is cool.
So the woman with the most entries to Le Mans is Anne-Charlotte Vernet, who took part in 10 consecutive Le Mans races from 1974 to 1983, with a class win in 1978 in a Porsche 911 Carrera and 6th place in a Porsche 935 in 1981. But Vernet is probably most famous in Britain for competing in the 1982 Dakar Rally with Mark Thatcher, the son of Margaret Thatcher, and they went missing for 6 days, and the Algerian army had to be called in to find them. Mark Thatcher later said that he had done 0 preparation for the event, and bear in mind he was a navigator, so I think we can pin this one on him.
Yeah, that sounds like liability is fairly clear cut.
Let's call that privilege, one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
The best finish for a woman is an overall 4th place and a class win, which was taken by the legendary Odette Seco in an Alfa Romeo 6C in 1932. In recent times, Vanina X, the daughter of
Jackie,
former Formula 1 driver and 6 times Le Mans winner Jackie, came in 7th in the 2011 race behind the wheel of a Lola Aston Martin. Up to and including 2024, there have been 24 all-female crews, with a 7th place finish by Odette Seco and Marguerite Moreau, the best overall finish for an all-female crew. And there have been 10 female class winners. On the other side of the pit wall, in 2011, British engineer Lena Gade became the first female race engineer on an overall winning team, when the Audi R18 of André Lotterer, Marcel Fassler and Benoit Triolet made it to the top step, and she repeated this feat in 2012 and 2014. In 2012, she was awarded, and I love this, the FIA World Endurance Championships Man of the Year. Well earned, if ironic.
Very good. Very
so
good.
There you go. It's good, that. I really like that. So it's dangerous. It is dangerous.
Are you just going to abruptly transition into diabolical stories about accidents?
I'm going in 2-footed right now. It has to be done. Pull the Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
Brace yourself, guys. This is where the trigger warning begins.
Yeah.
92 races so far. 22 drivers have died due to incidents during the race weekend. 15 during races and the remainder during testing, practice or qualifying. There's usually 1 or 2 deaths every decade, with the exceptions being the 2000s, which is the only decade without a fatality. The most recent fatality was in 2013, which was Alan Simonson in a race won by Tom Christensen, who dedicated the win to his fellow Dane. The other exceptions to the 1 or 2 deaths per year rule are the 1950s and the 1960s.
Yeah, where it went.
Half
through
of those
the bloody
22
roof.
drivers, half of those 22, 11 out of 22 of them, 5 in the 1950s and 6 in the 1960s. First driver death was in 1925, as mentioned. The worst incident in terms of drivers' deaths in the event's history, and I really, really have to mention drivers' deaths, was 1937 when a multi-car pile-up saw René Kipper thrown from his car and end up on the track, likely already dead at that point, while other drivers crashed whilst trying to swerve violently toward him. British driver and former Cambridge first-class cricketer Pat Fairfield struck the wreckage of Kepper's Bugatti before 2 more cars hit him. He was rushed to hospital but later died during surgery. So it's the only time in the event where 2 drivers have died as a result of a single incident.
Right.
We are at the crux of the story now, finally. So the 1950s and 1960s. There were some wonderful races and wonderful rivalries. Anyone who's seen, obviously, Ford versus Ferrari / Le Mans 66, depending on where you are in the world, will know one of the stories. I recommend you watch that film. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail because it's a story that's been very well told.
Although, did you know very quickly on that Ken Miles was a staff sergeant in World War II and served in Normandy?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Thank you for educating me again. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, interesting guy.
Ken Miles is a really interesting guy. I think we could do a whole deep dive on someone like Ken Miles.
Yeah.
I'm just going to mention him in brief today, but yeah, it's a good film. It is quite informative and quite factual, if a little Hollywood. But yeah, I recommend you watch that. So I'm going to start this story 24 hours before it ends. Many drivers and observers have expressed their discomfort and worries about the Le Mans start going into the 1969 race, highlighting the fact that so few drivers would fasten their harnesses, as I mentioned, and in order to avoid risking losing time, and the amount of death and injury this led to in early laps. In 1968, Willie Mayrus had his career ended when his door, not properly shut in the frantic start, flown open at the end of the Mulsanne Straight. The panic and aero imbalance this caused him to veer off and crash heavily, leaving him with multiple injuries, multiple breaks, a big head injury, and he was in a coma for 2 weeks. Later in 1969, he took his own life in an Ostend hotel room. There was criticism at the time, with many demanding a change, but nevertheless, as it often does, tradition trumped safety. So on the 14th of June 1969, the drivers assembled for a Le Mans start, as they had done 36 times before. When the flag dropped, the driver of 44 of the 45 cars sprinted as always for the vehicle. One man, though, took his time, walking slowly and purposefully towards his car before carefully doing up his harnesses before departing. That man was 24-year-old Jacques Bernard Edmond Martin Henri X, better known as Jackie X, also a Belgian national, and walking instead of running in protest at the start itself and the severe injuries that occurred to one of his compatriots just the year before as a result of it. X was already a 3-year veteran of Formula One and a race winner at this point. He would win 2 more races later that year on his way to second place in the championship, a feat he'd repeat the following year. He was considered one of the best young drivers around. So X's protest resonated for 2 reasons particularly. Firstly, it put him, who was in a decent car, he was in a Ford GT40 at this time, not with the works team, with a customer, but in a good car that had won the past 3 years. It put him in a unimaginably tough position to win from, potentially sacrificing his race for what he saw as a worthy cause. Secondly, within just a few minutes, he was proven right in a terrible manner. Privateer John Wolfe, inexperienced in a twitchy Porsche 917 he'd purchased for $40,000 only days earlier, and with no safety harness on account of the Le Mans start, crashed at Maison Blanche and was thrown out of his car as it spun and rolled. The car's fuel cell exploded as Ferrari's Chris Amon hit it. Fortunately, Amon escaped with only minor burns, but Wolfe wasn't so lucky. He was helicopter lifted to hospital, but was pronounced dead on arrival. It marked both a sadly predictable end to 2 decades where progress on safety was too often trumped by tradition, and also the start of arguably the greatest race and the most incredible story in the race's history. But I'll come to that later, because I'm going to jump back now to 1950. A little bit of framing there. Do you like that? Jump back. We go back now to 1950, which started with a warning from the event founder, Charles Theroux. Most of the track had been widened in the past year, but one area that had not been was the pit straight. Theroux warned that given the varying speeds of different size cars or different size engine cars, the slower cars must always keep right. He warned that this was especially important around the grandstands, given the grave risks involved. However, the track wasn't widened, the pit lane wasn't changed, things remained the same. That race was won by a Talbot Largo, driven by father and son Louis and Jean-Louis Rossier, though mainly by the father. This was despite Rossier Sr. being hit in the face by a barn owl late on. As I mentioned, it's not an uncommon occurrence at that speed.
Fucking birds.
I mean, the bird probably died. It's the poor bird.
Yeah, I mean, poor bird, but like, Jesus, I guess it does drive through the woods. There's a lot of birds.
Yeah. There was two more incidents of significance that are worth mentioning in 1950. In 1950, there was a near miss when, despite Farou's warnings, a slow car keeping right was overtaken by a car who then braked and moved quickly to the right in order to pit, which caused the slower car to roll and hit two gendarmes, fortunately without serious injury to either. So gendarmes are French police officers, for anyone who doesn't know. Yeah.
I was going to say, the thing that's probably worth mentioning, and because it's going to be a reoccurring theme of this narrow part of the thing, well, like there was also no rule, there was no pit lane entry.
I'll say that now. Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't. The reason you're explaining why someone would pull out and then brake and then pull back in is because there was no rule through which you had to enter the pit lane at a particular point.
Imagine it like a narrow 3-lane motorway or highway or whatever you want to call it, with the right-hand side being the pit lane, essentially, and then 2 lanes in between, but narrow lanes, so not much space in between them. So if someone wanted to pit on the right, but didn't want to wait behind you, they had to overtake you, move over to the right, and brake suddenly to reach their pit box. Obviously very dangerous, and in 1950 they had a near miss, which nearly caused the death of a couple of French police officers. However, nothing was changed. And we continue in the story, remembering that, as I get slowly more angry. In 1950... British driver, and this isn't relevant, this is just fun, but in 1950, British driver and former Olympic bobslayer, of which there's a few of them. I know this was a time where gentlemen used to compete in multiple sports for fun, but obviously a very amateur Olympic ethos. There's a few people who did bobsleighing. It's random. There's another one I'm going to come to in a second.
It's very random.
Former British driver and former Olympic bobslayer Eddie Hall finished the race solo, despite having a co-driver available. When asked by legendary sports journalist Dennis Jenkinson, who incidentally was also Sterling Moss's navigator when he won the Mille Miglia later on. So the Mille Miglia is a 1,000-mile race, or was a 1,000-mile race in Italy, which I will mention later on for a reason we'll come to. I keep doing this; it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, it is. Yeah, so many carrots.
When asked by Dennis Jenkinson what the toilet arrangements were if he never left the cockpit for 24 hours, Hall replied, "Green overalls, old boy."
Just shit and piss himself.
Pretty much.
That's grim. Because it's unnecessary. You could have just had another bloke and gone for a piss and a shit.
He did have another bloke. He could have literally given that guy like an hour, sorted himself out. Anyone can go 12 hours. 24 you can't. 12 hours. I could do 12 hours. Anyway. It's 1951, moving on swiftly, was won by a Jaguar C-Type.
I love the
first
fact,
for Jaguar.
Sorry mate, I love the fact that you think that talking about shit and piss is the worst part of this episode.
I do, weirdly. It's gross. Like, people don't want to hear that.
Well,
people haven't come to a podcast on... People come to a podcast on Le Mans thinking, I might, hear about some horrible things in this episode, but piss and shit ain't among them. So, yeah.
Well, let's see. Let's see
if we can outdo that, yeah. 951, Jaguar C-Type, Peter Walker, Peter Whitehead, 2 British drivers won it. 1952 is a really important year. So, the man named Pierre Levesque. His real name was Pierre Eugène Alfred Bouillon. He took his pseudonym, Levesque, from his great-uncle's pseudonym from when his great-uncle raced around the turn of the century. He was one of the pioneers at the turn of the century. He had watched the first race, the first 24 hours, as a teenager in 1923. Levesque was nicknamed the Bishop due to his solemn demeanour, and he owned a garage and brush factory in Paris. He was a talented sportsman. He played ice hockey for the French national team, and he was equally adept at tennis, apparently, as well as motorsport. He was quite late into motorsport, though. He only took it up in 1937 with Bugatti, aged 31. But he found his progress curtailed by the war, having raced at Le Mans in 38 and 39, with Talbot, failing to finish both. He resumed racing after the war, He crashed out of the 1947 French Grand Prix in a Maserati at Lyon, killing 4 spectators when he did, unfortunately. He injured 15 and himself, and he missed a year of racing as a result. He raced a handful of times in Formula 1 for Talbot Lago and at Le Mans for Talbot in 1951, finishing 4th, with René Marchand as his co-driver, a friend from his ice hockey days. In 1952, he had a brand new pale blue Talbot T26 Grand Sport. In the race, Levesque took what you would assume to be the first stint, running a solid 7th after the first hour. As people in front had issues and dropped out, he suddenly found himself moving up the leaderboard until 5 hours in, and still behind the wheel, he found himself in an unlikely second place. He wasn't able to challenge the car in front, but he held his ground until 12 hours in. With him still behind the wheel, the Gordini in front of him failed, and he took the lead, with 4 laps between him and the Mercedes behind him. Now, he was the far more experienced driver of his driving pair, so he made the decision at this point that he was going to finish the race by himself. And he was in the lead at this point. Obviously, I mentioned our mate Eddie Hall. 12 hours. He's 12 hours in at this point. Our mate Eddie Hall finished the race single-handedly, but he came 7th. No one had ever won the race driving on their own. So, as I mentioned, he was now in the lead. Sensing victory, he wasn't prepared to risk it on his less experienced teammate, so he carried on going. There were concerns from people that knew him, but he went on in an increasingly zombie-like state. He'd only eaten a handful of oranges during the 24 hours. His wife literally tried to trick him out of the car at one point to try and force a driver switch, but he was wise to it, and he stayed in the car. After 23 hours, their fears were realised, though, as Levesque's car ground to a halt before Maison Blanche. Officially, it was a broken crankshaft, but many believed in his tired state he had selected the wrong gear. The Mercedes behind him finished in a 1-2, the first German winners. Levesque was the final retirement of the race, but he was given a standing ovation by the French crowd. The Talbot he was driving was later sold for 1.3 million euros at auction.
Don't endorse that behaviour. What's he getting a standing ovation for?
It's pluck, I guess, would be, and he was obviously a French driver, which helps.
Well, yeah, but that's fucking dumb. But anyway,
there's one thing which is incredibly significant here, though. The Mercedes team, who had obviously won the race and would have come second and third to him, were very gracious with him, insisting that he join them in his celebratory winners' photographs. This formed a bond with them, which would later have monumental consequences, which we will come back to.
Yeah, I know what happens to this guy.
Yeah. So in 1953, unsurprisingly, the ACO mandated a maximum single stint lap limit of 80 laps, which is about 7 hours, roughly, in the leading cars. That year, Jaguar showed up with 3 race cars and a spare, and decided to test the spare, not realising that this was banned. As a result, one of their 3 quads was disqualified, so the 2 drivers of that car, men named Tony Rolt and Duncan Hamilton, decided the best course of action to salvage their weekend was to go on a bar crawl. As they were nursing hangovers with coffee the next morning, having been out to the wee small hours, as you call them, as they were nursing hangovers, they were informed by their oblivious team boss, who had appealed the decision, that actually the appeal had, which never happens, like if you make a technical infringement at Le Mans, you stay disqualified. But on this occasion, the appeal had been successful, and they were due to race in about 5 hours' time. So lots of coffee, and eventually a prescriptive cognac each later, they made it to the start line at 4 p.m. A crack in their windscreen didn't deter them, and Hamilton felt so good after the first stint, possibly helped by the air rushing in his face by the cracked windscreen, that he treated himself to another cognac. They ended up not only winning the race, but adding 9 miles per hour onto the average speed record, becoming the first team to break the 100 mile per hour average speed at 105 miles per hour, about 168 kilometers an hour, roughly.
So Dutch courage got them the victory.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and a shitload of caffeine.
So, Ferrari won in 1954 with Argentine José Folian González and Frenchman Maurice Trintignant driving the powerful 5-litre V12 375 and beating out the smaller engine but more agile and ridiculously good-looking Jaguar D-Type. Seriously, the cars in the 1950s were so good-looking, it's ridiculous. The Jaguar D-Type being chief among them, but to be fair, the 375 is pretty good-looking as well. So there we are. We come to 1955.
Yeah, the year 1955, which is the year that we have been making a series of references to for the last 30, 40 minutes.
Brace yourself.
Mm.
It was a beautiful sunny day. The race was looking like it was going to be between the mitre German manufacturing Mercedes with and how about this for a first driver pair?
They had a driver
Juan
lineup.
Fangio and Sterling Moss. Yeah. Juan Fangio, 5-time Formula 1 winner, and Sterling Moss, 0-time Formula 1 winner, but the best man to have never won a Formula 1 championship. No one has won more Formula 1 races than Sterling Moss, but not won the championship. I think he's won 16 races, which 16 races in those days is probably the equivalent of 40 races nowadays with the amount of racing they do. He was an incredibly talented driver that just never got the luck. The best of Britain's garagistas Jaguar, with future F1 world champ Mike Hawthorne partnering Eva Webb in their lead car. Fangio and Hawthorne were super quick as lead drivers. Moss was much quicker as a second driver than Webb was in the second seat, though. So Merck were the favourites. The Mercedes 300 SLR was the fastest road car in the world at the time, with its lightweight magnesium honeycomb chassis and revolutionary air brake compensating for out-of-date drum brakes, versus the Jaguar D-Type with its slippery aerodynamics, its straight-six XK engine and superior disc brakes, and its stunning looks, as I mentioned. It was a ridiculously good-looking car. Seriously, Google it. One of the most significant words I just said in that sentence was the word magnesium.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned, cars were originally made of steel. Lighter weight materials were used in the future. Obviously, aluminium, carbon fibre, obviously being the main component nowadays, strong but lightweight. Magnesium or magnesium alloys were the lightweight metal of choice throughout the 1950s, 1960s, which, as I mentioned, were the most dangerous time in motor racing history. And that is no coincidence.
There was one problem with magnesium.
Magnesium is a metal that burns very hot. It burns so hot that it's banned for use on civilians by the Geneva Convention as a incendiary weapon. You can use it on material targets, but you cannot use it on civilians because that would be a war crime. And voluntarily, drivers and teams in the 1950s and 1960s, even after a number of horrible incidents, even up to 1976, Niki Lauda's crash, he was driving a car with magnesium parts in it, which nearly killed him. Mm-hmm. And this is 21 years after this. So it goes to show the opportunity of victory will often outweigh the need to be safe, which is fine, in my opinion, when it's just the drivers at stake. They are adults, they can make their own decisions. But unfortunately, this was not one of those occasions.
Can I say something else very quickly about magnesium?
Oh, please do, yeah.
You can't put it out with water.
No, you can't, which is significant.
Yeah. It gets worse, in fact, if you pour water on it.
Yeah, it causes it to spark. If you imagine a bit like putting water on an oil fire where it spits the hot oil out, sort of a similar process to that, except for if magnesium hits you, it will stick to you and burn you quite severely. It is horrible, horrible stuff. So in the second Mercedes were the pair of American John Fitch, who I'll come to because he comes out of this story looking very good, and a French legend who had come oh so close in 1952, Pierre Levesque. So Pierre Levesque had been invited into the second Mercedes seat for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Mercedes were not the most popular team in France at the time.
Is that something to do with the fact?
10 years after the end of the Second World War, and this was a German car company, not just a German car company, but a German car company who had very strong links
to the Wehrmacht,
to the Nazi party. Yes.
They made all the tanks and shit, didn't they?
But Ferdinand Porsche designed the Tiger tank. That's a mad bit of a mad fact for you. So obviously the first reason was PR, getting a Frenchman in the car, and the second reason was after what happened in 1952, him narrowly missing out on going the full 24 hours and winning the race, and for Mercedes to have won it, and for the good relationship they had as a result of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fateful.
The photo opportunity came to fruition. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, well, quite. Also competing and relevant to this story was a British driver called Lance Macklin, who was driving an Austin Healey 100, which is relevant to this story. So, as ever here, a Le Mans start, Fangio was slow to get off. Blistering pace initially, the lead switched numerous times between Fangio and Hawthorne. Hawthorne was approaching the end of his first stint and needed to refuel, and the leaders were about to lap the slower Mercedes of Levesque and the much slower Macklin in his Austin Healey.
Is it worth saying very quickly that Mike Hawthorne is also a future At this point, not, but would become a Formula One world champion. So he was also a bloody good driver.
Yeah, 1958. Yeah, very good. Well, that's why I said like Fangio and Hawthorne were of a similar pace to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Hawthorne was arguably at this point quicker than Stirling Moss, which is pretty damn quick. So Levesque was trying to push past Macklin at this point. It was lap 35 as the daylight was fading at the Circuit de Désastre. The motorsport world was about to change forever. Hawthorne was called in by Jaguar. It was 6:26 p.m. At this point, as you mentioned, the pit lane was entirely undivided from the track. Drivers were just pulled into slots on the right-hand side of the track. Hawthorne was in a battle with Fangio in the Merc. He didn't want to lose a second on him. Everything from this point takes less than 30 seconds. Coming out of Maison Blanche onto the home straight, Hawthorne was now fast approaching Lance Macklin in the Austin Healey 100S, with the lap Levesque also approaching Macklin and Fangio not behind that, chasing Hawthorne. Macklin moved to the right, as was the instruction for slower cars, as per that warning from Charles Theroux back in 1950. So he moved to the right to let the faster Jaguar pass, not realising that the intention of Hawthorne was to pit. Rather than tucking in behind Macklin, which would have cost him precious seconds and allowed Fangio to close the gap or potentially overtake quicker, Hawthorne chose to overtake on the left, as had happened in 1950, and then pull in and decelerate in front of Macklin. The Jaguar, with its disc brakes, had much better brakes than the Austin Healey did. So it was likely that Hawthorne misjudged the speed of the Austin Healey and he thought he'd be able to comfortably pass it before pulling over. And obviously he didn't want to risk doing another lap with his fuel getting low. Hawthorne actually ended up overshooting his mark, and you're not allowed to reverse, you get disqualified for reversing. So he actually had to accelerate off and put another lap in.
He did go round again, yeah.
Yeah, so Macklin, with the brake differential and the speed, he had to brake hard and swerve left to avoid Hawthorne. The timing was horrible. Pierre Levesque's Mercedes fast approaching at over 150 miles per hour with Fangio quick behind him. Levesque, in what is possibly the last conscious act he ever did, raised his hand to warn Fangio. With no time to avoid, Levesque's Mercedes slammed into the Austin Healey at nearly full race pace. The front right wheel rode up over the sloped rear of the Austin Healey, acting as a ramp. It launched the Mercedes into the air. Macklin actually describes the moment because obviously the speed differential of the cars wasn't too different after the Merc launched over him. He said he could see Levesque flying over him, and it was the weirdest thing he'd ever seen. He just saw Levesque tucked into the seat and upside down above him, and I can't even imagine what was going through his head at that point.
Well, I mean, that's all just processing at that point. You won't even really
I mean, you wouldn't have time to think, yeah. So Levesque's car passed over the minuscule earth barriers, which were the only protection that the crowd had. The car made impact with the barrier. It rolled over itself a few times and exploded like a grenade, showering spectators with high-speed debris. Levesque was thrown from his vehicle onto his track and he was killed instantly. Debris, including the engine block, radiator, front suspension and hood, were sent flying into the densely packed spectator area, with only a few hay bales to protect them. It was a trifecta of carnage as the car split in three. The car's hood acted like a blade flying through spectators at head height. The engine block like a battering ram, and the rest of the car burst into flames. 14 people were immediately decapitated by the hood.
So grim.
The rear of the car hit the embankment and burst into flames, fueled by the magnesium, which burned hot. Water, as you mentioned, made the situation worse rather than extinguishing the flames, and it sent white-hot molten metal into the crowd and causing further death and destruction. Magnesium fires burn at 5,000 degrees as a bright white flame. As I mentioned, they're used in incendiary bombs. That's just not the material you want to be setting on fire. One particularly sad or noble story was a doctor was carrying his son on his shoulders. The doctor survived, his son didn't, so the doctor took his son's body back to his car, laid him down in there, and then went back to tend to the victims.
Jesus
which
Christ.
is just a superb upholding of your Hippocratic oath that I've ever heard. Well, not the Hippocratic oath, your duty as a doctor.
Yeah,
that's just incredible.
Also, just in like the psychological fortitude there. That is
I can't
wild.
even imagine. So the majority of the dead were French. An emergency morgue was immediately set up, but the race continued.
Yeah, I was going to say the race was not stopped, and neither was the fucking grandstand evacuated.
We'll come to that. Yeah, it's ridiculous. So Macklin's car hit the pit wall, having injured race officials. He was fortunately unhurt. One of the only good points to come out of this story. It was an absolute scene of horror. Duncan Hamilton, as previously mentioned, he was quoted saying, "The scene on the other side of the road was indescribable. The dead and dying were everywhere. The cries of pain, anguish and despair screamed catastrophe. I stood as if in a dream, too horrified to even think." It's hard to be certain how many actually died, as the French files on the disaster have never been fully opened, but officially it was 83 spectators plus Levesque to make 84. Some have speculated it was as high as 130 killed, because many people succumbed to their injuries later on who weren't recorded in this official number. Mike Hawthorne returned back to the pits in tears, completely distraught and blaming himself. His teammate took over, as you would imagine. So as I mentioned, the race continued. Ostensibly, this was to not cause entrances and exits to be blocked from ambulances and so forth, which is a legitimate excuse other than the fact that that should have been planned for. There should be emergency routes kept open, there should be waiting, and there should be more ambulances on site in the first place than there actually were. There was a token number of ambulances actually on site. You can tell I'm getting angry about this. This is the thing. I'm an engineer, I understand what near misses are for, what the benefits a near miss can bring. So you stop this happening, and they fucking had the opportunity to address this before it actually happened.
The race director also just that's not true. That's an excuse that was given. One of the excuses given was that it would have the people leaving would have caused like you say emergency services to be blocked. But then he also said things like only the Interior Minister for Sport from France has the authority to stop the race and other things like that. It's just bollocks. It was coincidental that they had that excuse. They never were going to stop it.
He also said the rough law of sport is that the race should go on, which is basically saying the show must go on.
Yeah.
Essentially that sort of attitude, which,
just bollocks.
I mean, the whole ambulance thing, it feels like retrospective excuse. I might be wrong, but it feels like that.
It's like a happy, convenient line you can take, but one that you never had at the forefront of your mind in the event of a disaster, which is why you didn't stop the race.
Yeah. So by this point, the only people really moving around in that area were priests performing last rites. Yeah, ultimately, at this point,
I think as well where the car goes into the crowd there was a tunnel going out of the grandstand and people
crowded up there,
queuing to leave. Yeah, so it was to get to a different part of the track, you had to go through a tunnel that was located where the car went into the crowd.
I can't even imagine. So Levesque's teammate, John Fitch, as I mentioned.
This guy is a legend.
Yeah, he was with Levesque's wife at the time, or widow probably by this point, would be a more accurate way of putting it. Mm-hmm. He was in the pit area with her when the incident occurred. People didn't know which Merc it was at first, but Levesque's wife knew immediately on Fitch's return it was her husband and that he was dead. Such was the confusion, Fitch's family in Indianapolis were at first notified that he was the driver. Information on the scale of disaster took time to filter through, as I said. When John Fitch heard, having made contact with his no doubt terrified family, that 48 were already dead, his family told him that when he called them to make sure they knew he was safe. He wisely recommended to the Mercedes team bosses that they withdraw. As a German team in France, causing French deaths only 10 years after the war ended in horrific circumstances would undoubtedly spark outrage if they then went on to win the race. The Mercedes team boss was persuaded eventually, and he decided to withdraw all the remaining cars. He didn't have the authority to do so, so an emergency meeting was called in Stuttgart, and it took several hours, but eventually the Mercedes all withdrew. They finished the season, the endurance race season, or just the season of motorsport generally, and then left and didn't return in any form, even as an engine supplier, until the 1980s, and even later than that as a manufacturer. Obviously in Formula One, it was 2012? No, 2010. When they came back after Brawn.
Yeah, when they hired Schumacher. Yeah, they took a big gap from sport. Yeah,
for obvious reasons. I mean, bloody institutional trauma, as much as anything. Before withdrawing, the Mercedes team boss had gone to Jaguar to ask if they too wanted to withdraw. They declined, and Hawthorne and his teammate went on to win the race. Hawthorne received some criticism after a photo of him drinking celebratory champagne was captured around 20 hours after the tragedy, obviously the next day once he'd won, by the French magazine L'Auto Journal. It was published with the sarcasm-laden headline, "To your health, Mr. Hawthorne." Hawthorne defended himself, saying he was still in shock at this point. But it is an interesting point, that one. A picture taken at that moment, I don't like pictures being used to prove someone's state of mind. A video, maybe, if he was shaking up the champagne or if he was drinking and smiling and kissing goals or whatever, fair enough, fair criticism. But a single picture, gallows humour kicks in at a certain point as well when you've been through trauma like that. You kind of got a smile sometimes. I don't want to presume that he was in the wrong, but equally, who knows? No, but he was definitely traumatised immediately after the event. That is on record.
Fuck that shit. That criticism is bollocks. Like, they didn't stop the race, mate. Like, you can't have a go at the guy who won it if you're not going to stop it. Like,
yeah,
can't have a go at a guy that won the race that you designed inherently dangerously either. Like, just give it a rest, man. Like, I mean, I know it was like 70 years after the fact, but like that kind of mindset is stupid. It's like hypocrisy of the highest order.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So the funerals and memorials started the following day, and they went on for a long time, as you'd imagine. It was the worst sports disaster ever caused by the sport directly. There was immediate bans on motorsports in many countries, pending safety improvements. Switzerland only lifted their ban, I think, about 10 years ago, which is mad. So it was banned there for well over half a century. Multiple drivers retired as a result of that. Fitch retired. Macklin, after a second accident later in the same season, retired. Fangio never raced at Le Mans again. So the real question I sort of come to now was, who was to blame?
On Fangio.
I think we're probably going to settle on the same thing here.
Yeah, but just very quickly, on Fangio, like, he was directly behind this, as you say, and Levesque put his hand up, warning him of what was coming. Yeah. But he managed to swerve through the debris and the mess and avoid all the carnage somehow, which, if nothing else, is testament to the man's skill.
I mean, whether it was skill or luck, it was an incredible moment for him to avoid it all.
I'm sure there was a healthy dose of luck, of course, but I don't think he drove in a straight line and got lucky, is what I'm saying. I think he did take some evasive action.
There's one of the main problems at Le Mans over the years is obviously not only the difference in speeds between cars. Obviously, you have different classes of cars with different top speeds and different cornering abilities, wholly different cars racing on the same place at the same time. You also have very different levels of driver ability as well. This was one of the factors that was accused in this, basically saying Lance Macklin was not experienced enough and not good enough, and that a better driver, had it been Fangio there, for example, may have been able to avoid it. I think that's bullshit, personally, because the rules say that drivers of all skill levels can go in there. Blaming a guy for not being He-Man is just ridiculous in this circumstance. Blaming a guy for not being a 5-time world champion or of the same level as that kind of player. Yeah, maybe Fangio avoided the accident because he was an absolute genius behind the wheel. This doesn't mean that the hundreds of other drivers who take part in every race.
You don't set safety standards.
Over 100.
You don't set safety standards and put in place rules for the top 0.001% of talent. That is the stupidest logic of all time.
You set it by the slowest in the group. Yeah. That's what you do. The lowest common denominator, the worst person you're inviting to join. Otherwise, you have to have a higher bar for entry if that's your decision making. If you say you have to be able to avoid this kind of accident, then you have to set a higher bar for entry. And there wasn't. And I'm sure Lance Macklin was a very good driver in his own right anyway.
Of course he would have been. I mean, it's very foreseeable that you might have a very serious accident. And as you said, there were precursors to this. I think, like, I know you're probably coming on to this in terms of who was to blame, but the one thing that you mentioned earlier on in this episode and touched upon, and just drawing those two strings together, was that when this track was designed, the top speed of the vehicles was 60 mile an hour. By the time this accident happened in 1955, the top speed was 170. And it hadn't had any design changes. So the speed had tripled.
Well, some small ones, but
nothing
substantive. The track had been widened in a few places. Yeah. But this section, where the grandstand was, where the pit lane was, like, this is the one thing. So this wasn't a freak occurrence. This is what annoys me. You could logically have concluded that exactly this accident would happen if you'd applied some analytical thought and breaking down the potential risks here. The speed discrepancies, there's slope rears of cars, there's differences in braking capabilities, there's a lack of a deceleration lane before the pit lane, the track was narrow at this point, the lack of any spectator protection. This was all known. Like, Charles Theroux had already warned about it. There'd already been a near miss in 1950. Like, this, there was no black box thinking here. There was no getting from a point where you have a near miss, you narrowly avoid what could have been a much, much worse accident, and then go, oh, well, let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Let's put a deceleration lane in the pit lane. Let's have a separate pit lane as they have at other circuits. Yeah, let's put a barrier between the racetrack and the pit lane. Let's make sure the drivers have to get into the deceleration lane. Or even let's make sure the drivers can't cross across that middle. You could have even made it a rule that you can't cross about that middle lane to pit. Like, you have to get into the right lane at the start of the straight to pit, as opposed to going around drivers. You could easily have made that a rule, but they didn't do anything. So who is to blame here?
I know who's to blame.
Mercedes were quick to blame Hawthorn. Hawthorn was quick to blame Macklin. Macklin actually sued him later.
Yeah, he did.
Because Hawthorn released an autobiography which basically accused Macklin of being guilty. Now, that never reached a conclusion because Mike Hawthorn died in 1959 in a road traffic accident, ironically, while overtaking a Mercedes.
Yeah, I read about
it. Which is another one of the cruel ironies that we seem to keep coming up across.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was an unpredictable move by Hawthorn. I think that's legitimate. I think if any driver is to blame here, I've got no problem with Hawthorn getting most of it. But he was doing a move that was legal. And had they banned drivers from crossing the central line, or had they put a pit lane in, or whatever else, it wouldn't have happened. Like, he was doing something that had happened before, and they'd done nothing about it.
The official inquiry concluded it was a racing accident, just a racing incident, didn't they? They didn't blame any of the drivers. Like, the thing that was fundamentally...
Yeah, that's really important. That's actually a good thing, a really good thing.
Like, I mean, because it's fundamentally a design issue. It was a safety culture issue, and I'm a geek for safety culture because I'm a health and safety lawyer.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, like, absolutely insane that you would seek to blame any individuals here when the circuit, as you were mentioning about magnesium and water earlier, they did pour water on the burning wreckage of Levet's car because they weren't prepared properly to deal with even like the most foreseeable of incidents, like a burning car, an on-fire engine, and the marshals were completely untrained. Like, nobody knew how to respond to an incident like this, and you had designed a racetrack that, if there was a high-speed accident, was almost inevitably going to result in fatality in the crowd as much as it was likely to happen on the track because there was no separation. I mean,
yeah,
you can put...
all the ingredients were there.
Yes, and you can, if
it wasn't a freak accident.
If you're that way inclined and you have the stomach for it, this accident is actually... There's video footage of it. It exists still, despite it being in 55. There's actually very clear footage of it, and you can watch it and you can see. Don't worry too much. It's obviously black and white and it's old and it's not zoomed in HD and all that. So you don't see anything graphic in the conventional sense of the word, other than you see obviously a car hurtling into a crowd. What you can see is the density of the crowd, the proximity of the crowd, the speeds of the cars, and ask yourself, would you have stood there fucking front row? Like, I know it's a different time, but like, it was entirely avoidable. Entirely avoidable.
It's entirely unfortunately, it's on the race organisers and them alone solely, I think, which is essentially what was concluded, and many changes were made as a result of this, including adding a pit lane. The thing that annoys me more than anything is this is something that applies to the 1950s and 1960s in motorsport generally. When I say black box thinking, for those who aren't aware of that term, it's an aircraft accident term, where obviously the black box of an aircraft is a good source of data as to what happened to that airplane. So what would happen is, if you have an incident, whether it be a fatal incident, whether it be a crash landing, whether it be anything, you study that data to within an inch of its life and you stop it happening again. And that's whether you have a near miss or whether you have a fatality. Yes, the biggest changes are often made on the back of fatalities, on the back of things that weren't foreseen before. Sometimes they could have been, sometimes they couldn't have been. Sometimes there are freak occurrences, sometimes there are things that slip through the net, and obviously the changes are made as a result. What pisses me off here was in 1950 there was a near miss and they did nothing about it. They let those, even faster cars 5 years later, because they got really a lot faster even over the course of the decade. As I said, someone added 9 miles per hour to the average speed in a single season with a pair of hangovers, and they still did it. These cars were much quicker and nothing changed, and it fucks me off.
I know you feel very strongly about this stuff, and I understand why. It's, yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to read a sort of a very accessible and digestible book that explores this very kind of thought process, then there is a book by that. Well, its title is Black Box Thinking by Matthew Said, and it is very, very good, and it explores this kind of thing.
One of the best books I've ever listened to.
Yeah, it explores this issue, and it's all about culture, learning from mistakes, improving, and it draws a lot of different comparisons. And this would be a very good sporting case in point of that not being applied, basically.
Yeah, there's plenty in motor racing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, let's move on to. Let's move on to talk a bit more about John Fitch.
Yes, I was literally about to say, can we talk about John Fitch? I really like this guy.
So John Fitch was a World War II pilot, first of all. He actually flew for the RAF. He was American, but he flew for the RAF before the Americans joined the war as one of the volunteers, and he flew for the US Army Corps after that. He was shot down and captured 2 months before the end of the war, but obviously survived the war. He was involved in another tragedy early in his career when a competitor tried to overtake him in a no-overtake zone and left the track, and unfortunately he hit a 7-year-old boy, killing him.
Whoa.
This was an incident. It led to the cancellation of races on public roads across the USA and emphasised that sort of track culture of US driving. John Fitch became a safety pioneer after the 1955 Le Mans disaster. He invented a number of low-cost but effective safety devices, most notably the Fitch barrier, which you'll probably have seen, especially if you're American. You'll probably have seen these, which are sand-filled plastic barrels, usually in yellow and black, designed to absorb the impact of a vehicle, usually placed before barriers in order to absorb some of the speed of a vehicle. Really clever idea. The ones at the beginning tend to be emptier than the ones at the end, so slowly it'll slow down the speed of a car that hits those barriers.
Impact, it stops you being propelled out as well, I think, which he made more sophisticated in racetracks. But
so to quote Jeremy Clarkson randomly, it's not the speed that kills you, it's the suddenly stopping that does it.
G-force.
Paraphrasing it slightly, yeah. So to take any impact out of those crashes whatsoever saves lives. And in this case, the estimation... so they were first used in the late 1960s, and it's estimated to have saved as many as 17,000 lives. So, if there's a silver lining that comes with this 84-plus people horrific incident that happened at Le Mans in 1955, it's the 17,000 lives that John Fitch may well have saved, not least as a result of bearing witness to the single worst accident in sport history.
Yeah, I mean, here, but when
caused by the sport anyway.
When we say bearing witness to it, like he also wasn't 150 meters up the road. Like I think Levet's body landed in front of him.
I think he was a little bit down when it happened, but then he went to see what was happening.
Yeah.
He left Levet's widow, went and saw what was happening, then went back to her, and she was like, "It's Pierre, isn't it?" And he was like, "Yeah."
Yeah, grim.
Which I imagine sucked quite badly.
Can I quickly say more about Mr. Fitch?
Please do.
He came up with more safety stuff, mate, which you'll love.
Did he?
Yes.
Oh, go for it, yeah.
He developed the Fitch driver capsule, which is an easy-to-install seat incorporating a seat back, which basically pivots and interacts with the seatbelt, and it reduced the inertial force experienced by a driver on contact, which is like a sort of extension of what you were saying about the barriers. And it was the origin, I think, of, or if not the origin, it was a component part of the beginning of the development of the driver survivor cell. And,
wicked.
And
that's really cool.
Yeah, and the other thing he did, which is also cool, is he extended that principle, so the Fitch driver capsule, by basically anchoring the helmet to the seat back to prevent basilar skull fracture and hypertension of the neck, which is this is
like the head and neck support kind of thing, the hands device.
Exactly.
Similar.
Exactly. It was like a precursor to the hands device. So
which has saved a lot of lives.
Basically, human necks are very good at dealing with front to back or back to front movement. So if your head drops forwards or gets hit backwards, as long as obviously you don't hit the base of your skull or your head, you're pretty good at surviving it. It is awful at surviving lateral movement. So if your head flips from side to side, like from right to left or left to right, like a rag doll, your neck will normally break if you do it at high speed, because it will go beyond the point at which it is able to move naturally.
Yeah.
That's the hyperextension point. So fixing the head still so that it can it can't rock from side to side, and obviously minimises the probability of it. You sort of headbutting forwards will go a very, very long way to keeping you alive in the event of a serious accident. And so, yes, sorry, Mr. Fitch, I just loved him because he did a lot of really cool stuff.
He did, yeah, and the hands device has definitely saved lives as well. Robert Kubica, Canada 2007 is probably the best example because it's very similar crash sat to Roland Ratzenberger's, not dissimilar to the one that killed him in 1994, the day before Senna died. There's been other obviously baseless skull fracture deaths. Dale Earnhardt in NASCAR, famously in 2001,
it is now
into a side wall and
it's now mandatory. That thing that you see the drivers taking off when they get out of Formula One cars, like it looks like a big U shape. They lift it over their head. Strap. Yeah, and then their helmet has got a strap on it, and you'll see their. So they take. Sorry, I'm not explaining this well. When they get out of the car, you'll see them lift a big U thing off, like what looks like part of the car. That's not part of the device, but it's keeps their shoulders underneath inside the cockpit.
Yeah.
And then when they get out, you'll see that there's a thing which is a U shape wrapped around their neck, which their helmet has a strap on stuck to, and that's the hands device.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting all geeky on everyone.
No,
I love it.
No, it's good. It's really important. Really important stuff.
So yes,
it saved a lot of lives.
You were
it unfortunately took deaths. I think I think one thing I am planning on doing in the future, if you would allow me, would be to do a Formula One, or particularly Formula One, but motorsport generally episode where you see the before and afters. Like you compare Ratzenberger to Kubica, or you compare other incidents like sort of the ones in the early 70s where drivers went through Armco barriers to Roman Grosjean's with the Halo device. I think that'd be a very interesting episode. Like a lot of the time it's why it took so long, and this is a really good example. Anyway, I need to wrap up this episode because we're going long again, but I'll skim through the end of this. But there's been similar accidents, as I said. There's 97 Miglia, 9 spectators, and driver Alfonso de Portago and his navigator Edmund Nelson were killed. Famously, actress Linda Christian was photographed kissing de Portago in an image that became known as the Kiss of Death, which was just moments before his tyre burst 150 miles per hour, sending the pair into the crowd. It was a final Miglia as a result. De Portago was an interesting guy, actually. He'd ridden in the Grand National twice, just to link together to an unlikely previous episode of ours.
Episode 1, baby.
Yeah. He also once flew a plane under Tower Bridge to win a bet, and he competed with his cousins in the 1956 Winter Olympics in the bobsleigh, missing bronze by 0.14 seconds coming fourth.
Sorry.
So, yeah, interesting guy. But
he flew under Tower Bridge?
Yeah, why not?
Well,
to win a bet.
Yeah, but
it's like £500, so a decent bet.
But between the bridge surface and the Tower Bridge, or under the actual bridge? Because if you went under the bridge, that is absolutely fucking mental.
It depends whether the bridge is up or not, but either way,
yes,
daring, ballsy.
If he went,
surprised he didn't get arrested.
If he went under the bridge with the bridge down,
he would
and
get shot down nowadays.
Yeah, that's insane.
He would immediately get shot down nowadays.
He wouldn't even get near it. Yeah,
he wouldn't get anywhere near it. No. Anyway, also in Formula One, the worst accident in Formula One history was 1961 at Monza. Wolfgang von Trips was leading the Formula One World Championship at the time. The penultimate race of the season, 15 spectators. To be fair, there was barriers here. The spectators were very close to the barriers, though. So it hit the barriers and killed a lot of spectators close to those barriers. So von Trips, as I mentioned, was leading the championship. He'd qualified on pole, but fallen behind Jim Clark at the start, only to hit Clark when he was attempting to overtake him on lap 2. Sending him into a side barrier and killing him and the 15 spectators. It cost him his life, and Phil Hill, his teammate, got just barely enough points to overtake him in the championship as well. Which obviously is the least of his concerns at that point, but nevertheless, another horrible incident 6 years after this one. Yeah, so... Yeah. Fun, isn't it? I was gonna do the rest of the 1950s and 60s and stuff, but frankly, I don't have time. So Jaguar dominated late in the 50s. A Scottish team called Ecuria Cos, which is French for Scottish stable, secured a 1-2 finish with the D-Type. Ferrari began its dominance of Le Mans after that, but Ferrari was struggling financially due to the amount of money they were putting into it. So Ford tried to buy them in 1963, and obviously failed to do so after Enzo Ferrari backed out due to a clause which required any larger spending to be signed off by Ford. He wasn't having that for his race team, so he pulled out the deal. Ford then decided to beat Ferrari by whatever means necessary, no matter the cost. So that was what led to the GT40. GT40 won in 1966, which is Le Mans 66, what the film's about, and 1967 as well as 1968. And then we come to 1969. So one thing that changed towards the end of the decade, sponsorship came on cars from 1968 onwards, which you get some mad cars in the 1970s, which are just painted like cigarette packets and stuff like that, which is bloody awful. But a lot of this point before this, they didn't give any prize money for Le Mans at all, barely any, certainly not enough to cover your costs of the race. Sponsorship did change that, so that's one benefit. It allowed teams to become more sustainable. What would happen previously is teams would dominate for a few years and then run out of money, like Ferrari did, and disappear for a few years.
Presume sponsorship might have, maybe not directly, but indirectly contributed to a change in attitude and safety, because I imagine, Marlboro didn't want,
I have never thought about that, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, even
it'd be worth looking into that.
Even people selling commerce that would go on to cause a massive cancer epidemic probably still wouldn't want the image of somebody burning to death in their car.
Oh, that's so dark, but yeah. Well, not if it affected cigarette sales.
Yeah, exactly. So I wonder if it did. It's just amusing.
Yeah. So 1969. So as I mentioned, 1968, there was a near fatality, which eventually led to the suicide of the driver, who was a Belgian national, and Jackie Ickx in protest, walking to the start line. So we find ourselves 1969 Le Mans become a global battleground for innovation, national pride, technological experimentation, and sponsorship. We find ourselves back at the start line. Jackie Ickx ambles to his car, found himself second to last, I think, just before John Wolfe met his tragic end. It was 2 p.m. start. It was an earlier start than usual due to the French general election which took place on that day, caused by Charles de Gaulle's sudden resignation. Despite having won 3 races in a row, the Ford GT40, as Ickx was driving as a customer car, was now approaching obsolescence at this point. At the end of the first hour, Ickx and his teammate Jackie Oliver's GT40 wasn't even in the top 10. Ickx and Oliver paced themselves, aiming to keep in touch and be ready to attack the next day if possible, and one by one the Porsches leading the race began to suffer failures. First an oil leak, then a gearbox failure, a damage, a collision, and another fiery crash, fortunately without fatality in this instance, seeing more Porsches away, and Ickx and Oliver crept up the order. Within 3 hours, they found themselves in second place behind the Porsche 908 of Hans Hermann, which might be the most German name I've ever heard in my life, Hans Hermann, and Gerard Lerousse in front. So Hermann and Ickx were the main drivers and were behind the wheel for the finish. You had an immensely experienced 41-year-old in Hermann and a promising 24-year-old in Ickx battling it out. And just to add flames to the fire, probably not the best way of putting it. It's also the wrong phrase, but nevertheless, Ickx had barely enough fuel to make it home at this point. So Ickx knew his tactics. If he led out Tetra Rouge, the German's power would overtake him down the Mulsanne Straight. But if he'd be close behind him at that point, he could slipstream, overtake, and hold on for the rest of the lap. So he held fire until what he thought was the last lap. He made his move, he took the lead, and barely held on to cross the line while running on fumes. But he got his timing wrong. It wasn't the last lap. It was the penultimate lap. So he found himself in the last lap with barely any fuel, having to try again and knowing the Hermann would now know the move. He tricked the German into overtaking him by pretending to run out of fuel, slotted into a slipstream, and repeated the overtake. He held on till the end of the lap, and he won by just over 100 metres in the closest finish in the history of Le Mans. Jackie Ickx winning his first ever 24 Hours of Le Mans. The man who'd walked to his car had won by a whisker.
Nice. That is a great ending.
It's a brilliant race. I think we're a bit critical about Jackie Ickx on our Monaco episode, with the ending of the 1984 Monaco Grand Prix being somewhat his fault. But Jackie Ickx was a legend. He won 5 further times at Le Mans. He never won the Formula One World Championship, became second twice, but won a good few races. And most importantly, the single most important thing is that was the last ever Le Mans start like that. 1970, they started in the herringbone formation, but in their cars and strapped in already. And in 1971, and to this day, they start with a rolling start, which in one sense is sad. The Le Mans start was cool, but ultimately, if drivers aren't going to fasten their belts, it would be cool one day if someone could come up with the technology to have fastening belts with like sensors that you can't start the car until it's done. So you have to fasten your belts. You could replicate the Le Mans Star. It still would have the danger of you'd have to widen the straight. You'd have the danger, obviously, the different speed differentials of cars. But it's a cool thing. But ultimately, not at that cost. Not at the cost of drivers. Not at the cost of crashes. So yeah, Jackie X's protest worked, and he won the race. So there we are. That's me.
No. If you just put Jackie X's World Championship performances into context, he came runner-up to the great Jackie Stewart 1 year, and then to Joachim Rindt, who we've spoken about, is the only posthumous world champion, and probably would have had a shot at the Triple Crown had he not died.
Yeah, legend. So, yeah, it was a good driver, and he was in contention, I think, or at least depends on whether you believe the film Rush or not, but I think he was in contention for what was James Hunt's seat at McLaren in 1976 as well, so might have had a title shot there. But then again, that film takes a lot of liberties, so I wouldn't want to call that factual. I watched that yesterday because I love that film.
Clay Regazzoni came third in 1970, since we've mentioned James Hunt, who was his first
Clay Regazzoni, yeah.
Who was the teammate.
Fine moustache.
Yeah, and was the teammate of
Niki Lauda.
Niki Lauda, thank you. When Niki Lauda got his first drive for Ferrari. Yeah,
he was.
Tangents. Mate, that was super informative, but hopefully this year's Le Mans is not going to result in a fireball and 90 people
I really hope, well, obviously not that bad. I really hope it's instant free. As I said, it's been 12 years since the last death, so they're not out of the woods. It still happens. It's still dangerous. There's been big crashes in the meantime, and big crashes in World Endurance Championship races and similar races, including spectator deaths still. But
which remains part of it, if we're honest. The fact that it remains dangerous, it is still a test of your, as you say, endurance, of your focus.
You can only make it as safe as you can possibly make it. Freak occurrences will happen. It's just the missed opportunities. If you have a near miss, you have to fix it before it becomes an incident. But they didn't.
But the reason this race sits amongst the great races is because it tests the skill of the very best in a way that other races don't. And that's why it's part of the Triple Crown. Two
Triple Crowns.
You can win the most technical and perhaps most skillful event in the Formula One World Championships. You can win the Indy 500 and everything that comes with the high-speed nature of that. But this tests different aspects of your skill.
Yeah.
There's a romance to that.
Focus, concentration, endurance, muscle wastage, like losing your muscles.
Your tactics.
Nighttime driving. Animals running out into the road. Bats flying in your face or owls flying in your face. It's like nothing else. It really isn't.
So if people have been persuaded to tune in, where might they find it? Yeah.
So you can watch it in the UK, as well as Germany, Italy, and Spain. Eurosport is the place to watch it. Also Discovery Plus. You can also watch it on FIA TV. I think there's a World Endurance Championship TV channel you can subscribe to, but I imagine if I'm telling you this, you probably already subscribed to it if you know about that and you like endurance racing. In the USA, it's on Max, apparently, whatever that is, and Motor Trend. I'm trusting Google with this, like how accurate this is, I don't know. Canada, CTV Digital, and obviously the FIA TV as well. But yeah, I mean, just Google it really.
Yeah.
I do have one quick thing to end on, if possible. But that's me, unless you have anything else to add.
No, mate, you go ahead.
Well, we can say where are we next week? I think would be a good place to go.
Well, one of the great...
But it's on you, baby.
One of the great tours is starting. One of my favourite events in world sport, the Lions.
It's only every 4 years.
The Lions Tour. So yeah, we'll be introducing the Lions Tour. The Premiership Rugby final is actually this week. Bringing a close to the English Rugby League season, Rugby Union League season, sorry. And then it's straight into the Lions Tour. And so we're going to do the Lions.
Yeah, I'm extraordinarily excited. I will contribute bits and pieces, but it's mainly on you, buddy. My voice needs a rest after this week. My ranting voice needs a rest. But I am going to end just on one thing, because it's June, it's Pride Month, and I'm going to end with this. So, Hurley Haywood is one of the most decorated drivers in motorsport history. He won Le Mans 3 times, 1977, 1983 and 1994, alongside 5 victories at Daytona and 2 at Sebring, completing the coveted Triple Crown of endurance racing 2 times over. He previously served in Vietnam as well, and in his 2018 autobiography confirmed something that had quietly been known in racing circles for many years, that he was gay. As with other sports, motor racing does not have a large LGBTQ representation. This was a big deal, even if it came many years after his success. In June 2019, to mark the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, an event that widely considered to be a watershed moment in modern LGBTQ rights, Queerly magazine named him one of the Pride 50 trailblazing individuals who actively ensure society remains moving towards equality, acceptance, and dignity for all queer people. There you go. That seemed a nice place to end.
Well said.
3-time Le Mans winner.
Well said, mate. Very nice. Gran. Well, let's leave it there.
Excellent.
See you next week.
See you next week for the Lions Talk. Excited, yes. I'll see you later, mate.
Bye, pal.
Once again, thank you so much for giving us your time and listening to the Sporting Almanac. Not quite 24 hours, but not too far away. I promise we'll make these episodes shorter as time goes on. If you liked it, give us a like, subscribe, rate, comment, whatever you can do to trim those algorithms. More important than algorithms, though, is word of mouth. Please tell your friends. Nothing ever beats that. Our theme tune is Oh Yeah by Harmony Productions. You can find us on Blue Sky and Instagram at The Sporting Almanac, or drop us an email at sportingalmanacpodcast@gmail.com. We'll see you next week for the British and Irish Lions Rugby Union. But until then, stay curious. Sport is nothing without the stories that make it. Goodbye.